Hello and welcome to Nature Culture. I'm Ali Whaley, and in this episode we're looking at plant patents. You've heard of patents. They're the exclusive right to make, use or sell a new invention, and they last for about 20 years, depending on the country. The first light bulb was patented, so was the machine for slicing bread, slinkies, hula hoops. There was even a patent for the first combined stocking and panty, otherwise known as tights. So what I want to look at today is the invention of plants. Can you invent a plant, and who would own it if you did? So it all started in America in the 1920s. Plant breeders were getting increasingly frustrated that their developments weren't rewarded in the same way as mechanical inventions, and so they started pushing for plant patents. The argument was that this would incentivize the development of new crops, and that would be good for the country because the new crops might be resistant to things like drought and cold. And these discussions were taking place just at the beginning of the Great Depression, so the idea of a policy that could generate a more reliable food supply was met with open arms by the government. And so in 1930, the Plant Patent Act was passed in America. At first, this just meant that essentially you couldn't propagate a patented plant. It would be an infringement to physically take a cutting and plant it in your own farm. Fair enough, but you were allowed to develop a similar plant of your own. This detail has changed immensely, and we'll get back to that. Gradually, similar acts protecting plant developments were passed around the world until basically the whole world is doing plant patents, or plant variety rights, in one way or another. And you've come across them. Take Pink Lady apples, for example. They were a protected variety called Crips Pink, which has now been trademarked under the name Pink Lady. And the global retail value of Pink Ladies is $1.5 billion. It's big money. So, you're probably wondering what plant patents and variety rights actually do. Well, they're very different things, patents and variety rights, but both systems stop farmers from growing and harvesting protected crops without the rights holder's permission. So that might mean paying license fees or royalties on seeds, or with patents, it might even mean signing a contract agreeing how you're going to grow and harvest the crops. I spoke to Robin Wood from the British Society of Plant Breeders, the body which protects plant variety rights in the UK, to ask him why breeders need variety rights.
I think plant variety rights and breeders' rights are not a good thing, they're a great thing. I think they're a great thing because we invest so much money in research and development. For a hybrid variety, it might take us 16, 17, 18 years of development to get a hybrid from scratch into the marketplace. It's an extremely expensive activity. And if it came that we bred something, we were to create an invention or an innovation that could get copied by somebody else, we'll get nowhere. So we need to ensure that the owner gets the just reward for what he's been doing.
I asked Robin if there are ways in which the development of new crop varieties is good for the environment.
Well, I think there's a whole host, really. We would talk about being able to grow more crops on less land as being number one. Between 1961 and 2010, the amount of land used for field crop production has gone down by 2/3. We might talk about things like carbon capture. Can we use cover crops to protect soils, protect the environment, or capture carbon as well? There's lots of things that we can do as plant breeders. And I do imagine that we'll see varieties in the marketplace one day, might be 10 years' time, that say these varieties use less nitrogen, or these varieties use less phosphate or potash, so the farmer needn't apply so much, and the plant is more efficient at uptake of these fertilizers, and that will reduce production costs and also protect the environment as well. So there's a whole gamut of stuff, and I think in the UK, I think Harper Adams University developed some lettuces that took longer to show browning on the cut surface. So in other words, your bagged lettuces could be in the refrigerator for a little bit longer. Well, every day it's in the fridge for a day too longer means you aren't throwing things away, for argument's sake. So it all helps the food chain.
So I think we can all agree that plant breeding has its benefits. But what if these incentives actually stunt progress? There's an important difference between variety rights and plant patents. Variety rights are subject to what's called the breeder's exemption. That means that even though other people aren't allowed to grow and sell your protected crops without your permission, other breeders can still use your protected varieties to crossbreed from them and develop new varieties out of old genes. For that reason, most people agree that the variety rights system is a pretty good balance between rewarding breeders and keeping the gene pool open. But patents take the notion of plant ownership a step further. If a plant is patented, other breeders can't crossbreed from it and create new varieties out of those patented genes. And it really is patented genes. To find out more, I spoke to Johanna Eckhart from the NGO coalition No Patents on Seeds.
It's important for breeders to have access to biological resources, genetical resources, to improve our plants, because we have to adapt our plants to new pests, to new diseases, to different climate conditions. And for this, you need access to the genetic material. And if we would now see an increase in patents, it could happen that breeders don't have the access to this genetic material anymore. And as well that many small-scale, medium-sized breeders give up their work completely. But in the worst case, if you imagined that the big seed companies that are already very dominant on the market, they are not interested in having a big variety of different plants, but that they only have the very few food crops. So this would as well lead to further concentration in this regard.
And that's why patents are a threat to food security then?
Absolutely, because it gives as well the power of our food crops in the hands of companies, of big companies. And I don't know if you would want to trust them with that, as we have seen in the past, that they might not always have the bigger good of the society in mind.
By the way, when Johanna talks about the big seed companies having a lot of power, she's referring to the fact that as of 2017, just 2 companies control 50% of the world's seed business. Back to the interview. And am I right in thinking it's possible to patent a trait that already exists in nature?
Yes, unfortunately it is. There have been many patents that cover gene variants that have been found, for example, in wild relatives of plants, and then they are, with crossing and selection, they are brought into a new variety. So you never just build a plant from scratch, so to say, but you always have to start with something. But if the methods you're using are considered to be technical, then you could patent it.
So let's look at an example. Lettuce. In 2018, a Dutch company called Rijks van Zatilt was granted a patent for high-temperature germinating lettuce seeds. With global temperatures rising, lettuce seeds that can germinate in a warmer climate sound like a great idea. But there's one problem. The company doesn't just own this one type of lettuce that they've bred. They might own the patent on all future lettuces that can germinate at high temperatures. So if you're a farmer or a plant breeder and you develop a whole different lettuce that's completely distinct from the company lettuce, and your lettuce, on purpose or by accident, has this trait of being able to germinate at high temperatures, you might be breaching their patent.
If the trait is similar to the one described in the patent, this can definitely be the case, and it has been in the past. There is this risk that it is well covered by a patent.
A new rule that was added in 2017 has tried to rectify this, but it hasn't really worked because new loopholes keep opening up in spite of it. Another issue is that the effect of a patent is wider than the patent itself. Patent law isn't exactly clear, so too many patents in one area form what's called a patent thicket. And that means that breeders won't even try to explore certain areas because they just don't know what's protected and what isn't, and it's too much of a risk to try.
There's as well another case on, it's a tomato, and there's a very relevant virus at the moment. It's called the Jordan virus. And this is, for example, as well a resistance where there are already about 10 patents by 5 different companies. But this, for example, it's an important feature in a plant or in a tomato that would be very useful for further breeding. But as you can imagine, if you already have 10 patents on it, it makes it almost impossible, or breeders wouldn't touch it because they know that they have to invest years of work to come to a result. And if they see that there might be a chance that they are then going to infringe a patent, they will of course not take this risk.
I see. So it's really stopping people from innovating for fear of everything coming to nothing if there's an infringement problem.
Yes, we see that again and again, that breeders are contacting us and saying that they are not sure if they can work with this resistance. They are not sure if there are patents on it, because you have to imagine that for a big company, obviously they have the legal department, etc. But a small-scale breeder, they can't really afford to look into that in that much detail. And even if they contact us, it can be difficult to figure out what resistances or other traits might be covered. So it makes it really difficult for a breeder to navigate those patent thickets.
I should add in a crucial detail here about what you are and are not allowed to patent according to the European Patent Office. You can't patent laws of nature or naturally occurring products. So that means if you discover a new element, you can't patent it, or if you discover a new law of physics, you can't patent that either. These things already exist in the world, and discovering something is not the same as inventing it. When it comes to plants, you can't patent a plant variety, but you can patent a trait, like resistance to disease or the ability to germinate at higher temperatures, whatever it might be. You can patent that trait if you developed plants with that trait through technical means. So basically, genetically modified plants are fair game for patents. On the flip side, according to the European Patent Office itself, if you develop a plant through conventional breeding, crossbreeding and selection, you cannot patent it. Why then have over 300 patents been granted on plants developed through conventional breeding? The high-temperature germinating lettuce case was one such patent. No patents on seeds claimed that that lettuce was bred through conventional methods. According to the letter of the law, such a patent should never have been granted. The reason so many patents like this are granted is that big seed companies want as many patents as they can get. So, according to a report by No Patents on Seeds, they write the application in such a way that it looks as if they use technical means, but really they only used conventional breeding. They'll mention technical processes that went on during the development, when in fact those technical processes didn't actually contribute anything to the development of the new plant.
Of course, this is just something of the definition in the law. You could as well ask the question if it is ethical at all to patent a plant. But we in our work at least have to have the basis in what is already written in the law. We can't really change the world radically, but really say that at least traditional breeding is excluded from patentability, and these legal texts should be respected. And not even that is the case at the moment.
The good news is that the tide is changing. Member states of the European Patent Office, one of which is the UK, are trying to amend the law and make it stronger. I mentioned earlier some of the changes made in 2017. One of those new laws essentially says that patents on technically bred plants don't cover naturally bred plants with the same traits. That means that in theory, you should be able to naturally breed your own high-temperature germinating lettuce with no problems. But I'm told that in practice, this caveat doesn't really hold much weight, but it's heading in the right direction. Better still, the European Patent Office claims that there is an impending amendment which will give breeders free use of patented plant material, which means that if all goes to plan, European plant patents will one day have a breeder's exemption, just like variety rights. So all breeders could use all genes to breed whatever they want, which would be fantastic for our plant diversity and our food security. That is a great amendment if it happens.
In an ideal scenario for us, there wouldn't be any patents on plants. But the most important step would now be to close those loopholes in regards to traditional breeding. But of course, to ask for no patents on GMO would be an even more ambitious goal. So let's see what the future holds.
Before we wrap up, there's one last spanner in the works which I want to mention. The UK is covered by the European Patent Office, but not European plant variety rights, and that presents problems of its own. Here's Robin Wood from the British Society of Plant Breeders again.
before the UK left Europe, you could register a variety in the UK and in the EU. Now that we've left the European Union, we have two separate marketplaces. So we need to go through the process twice. That's okay, but what it means is that if you're a European plant breeder and you have some new material, you might think, wait a minute, the European marketplace is 450 million people. The UK marketplace is 70 million people. I've got a limited budget. What I'll do is I'll put my money where I've got the least risk. That might be the European marketplace. For example, it means that some British farmers might have later access to the best variety, the newer varieties, should we say, and that puts them at a competitive disadvantage. And I do have a small worry with a small w that the UK might become second choice for the introduction of innovative new varieties from Europe.
So that's it for plant patents and variety rights. It's a messy, tangled mix of jargon and lettuce, but it matters, and now you know.